our fourth lesson dealing with Samson. I'm using maybe an odd verse to some of you, but I think it is a verse that presents to us the way things looked, but not the way things as they were. The way things looked with what happened to Samson, then the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, our God hath delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. Well, that's the way it looked, but that's not the way it was. That is for sure. The reality is that Samson gave Israel the victory, but in a sense, too, you can also say that Samson gave the Philistines the victory over Samson. He could not be defeated if and when God used him and empowered him. This chapter doesn't take away from Samson's ultimate victory over the Philistines, but it does emphasize some things. And that is exactly what I have up on the screen here. And the title really comes from a sermon that I preached years ago, and it's also an outline that was not mine originally. Brother Chris from Kentucky gave this to me, and I thought, oh, that's good. I'm going to go in there and look at that. And sure enough, I really appreciated this, and I'm going to use the same thing because it is the result of sin. Sin will bind you, sin will blind you, and sin will grind you. You'll see that as we go through it, and I'll kind of pay attention to that. Also, I'm going to let you know I'm not in any hurry to get through this. I don't see any way that I can get through this whole chapter tonight. I can't do it, and probably teach on it. So we're going to take our time, and we'll go as far as we can in the time allotted, and then just pick it back up wherever we stop tonight. When I preached on that same topic, sin will bind you, blind you, and grind you, it was not an exegetical type message. It wasn't going from verse to verse. It was more of a narrative and a devotional type method. Our study here is more precise or critical. It is an examination along with explanation of each portion of text that we're going to try and tackle. In this final chapter, we need to remember that Samson is the last judge listed in this book. But remember, he's not the last judge of Israel. You still have Eli and you have Samuel. And they play an important role. It's interesting that just these 12 are listed that are here. And we learn from this, and it probably would be good for you if you ever sat down and think about the characteristics that you see in Samson. Samson is impulsive, he's fleshly, he's arrogant, he's naive, he's selfish, he's vengeful, and he certainly lacked self-discipline. But he was used by the Lord, and in a mighty way. We saw the birth of Samuel in chapter 13. I'm not going to get into all the things here. We saw Samson stray in marriage when he went down to the wrong place with the wrong people and tried to find happiness in the wrong pleasure. We saw, too, his vengeance in chapter 15. We saw it through his retaliation and going down and finding his wife had been given to somebody else. And in his incarceration, he allowed them to tie him up. And of course, that didn't last. He was able to break free and destroy them. And also his brief appreciation of the Lord and what he had done. But then his frustration that he felt like in that last part of that last chapter, you're going to let me die, Lord, from dehydration after I had such a great victory. That's why I say he's kind of arrogant, even with God. Kind of odd. In chapter 16 here, we're going to see the harlot, we're going to see Delilah, and then we're going to see his death. We break it down into verses 1 through 3, the actual sin that he gets involved in, which is with that harlot. And then in chapter 16 from verse 4 to verse 20, this is all about Delilah here. But I call it the binding. In verses 21 and 22, you'll see both the blinding and the grinding. That really is in one verse. And then lastly, we see from verse 23 to verse 31, the celebration of the Philistines. When we start looking at his sin exposed in verses 1 through 3, we could also have some fun with this title, Samson and the Gates of Gaza. You could call it some other things that are here as well and begin to look. But again, we see then went Samson to Gaza and saw there an harlot and went in unto her. I might go ahead and read all 3 verses and then we'll come back and comment on it. But I could just tell you again, he goes to the wrong place. Again, he's got his eyes on the wrong thing. And again, he's looking for the wrong kind of pleasure. Folks, there's all kinds of pleasure in this world. But the greatest pleasure that you will ever really receive and achieve is serving God and doing his will. There is no greater pleasure than that, knowing that you have served the Lord and done what he wanted you to do. It's the height of a Christian point of pleasure, is to know that today I was used of the Lord. I did exactly what he wanted me to do. And you could see it. Whatever the results were, good or bad, I know that I did right. Let's keep on reading. He went there and saw a harlot and went in unto her. And it was told the Gezites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city. So it's kind of like they stayed right there where, they locked him in as far as the city was concerned. They didn't lock up the house. They didn't surround the house. They surrounded the city. They all put themselves at that gate. So they laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city and were quiet all the night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson laid till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all. That's the locking mechanism. And put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of an hill that is before Hebron. Now, in this portion, you're going to note both his weakness and his might or his strength. It's obvious where his sin is, and he doesn't even try to hide it, nor does the author. Samson, again, goes in the wrong direction towards Gaza. Gaza is one of, if not the chief city and stronghold of the Philistines. In fact, Gaza will be a stronghold for a long time, even after Samson, even into David's reign. It will eventually be the last city that Samson, and I couldn't say that he ever sees, but it's certainly the last city that he is ever in and experiences. It is in Gaza that Samson sees a harlot and goes in unto her. Samson is again overcome by his flesh and the longings for pleasure, and he finds it in sin. After a great victory that he had experienced in destroying many of the Philistines, comes a great fall. He gave sin the opportunity to capture him by being in the wrong place. He pursued sin really once it saw him. And it is only by God's might and strength that this sin did not destroy him completely and immediately. He risked damage to his spiritual health and well-being to satisfy his temporary fleshly appetite. A lot of times those fleshly appetites don't last through our youth, but they can last the entire life. But this story really does too expose the deceitfulness of sin. We have to be aware of the dangers of sin, one of which, again, Hebrews 3 and 13 tells us that the danger of the deceitfulness of sin is the hardening of the heart. We have to be very careful with that. The hardening of the heart can take place and be called apathy, false security. We can use it to justify ourselves. There is a way that seems right unto a man, but the ends thereof are death. We must be aware that sin is attractive. Sin does have a temporary pleasure attached to it. It appears harmless. It appears beneficial. But we should not and cannot fall prey to the idea that we can never fall like Samson did. See, again, that's a deceiving part of sin. It deceives. And in this chapter, as I've already stated, this sin will bind him, blind him, and send him to prison where he grinds. That's the lesson from this chapter that everyone needs to reckon with. Samson was a man of great faith and a man of great fault. In these short verses, we see how Samson could literally rip out the gates from all of its hinges, connected together, and carry it for, I don't know how many miles this was, but it's a good distance. And some will say, well, it wasn't all the way to Hebron, but to a hill towards Hebron. Well, however far it was, it's more than a few miles. And you're talking about a gate to a city. He ripped the whole thing out and carried it on his shoulders. Sadly, you think about he could rip out the gates and carry it so far, but he could not stop sin at the gates of his heart. Such strength and yet weakness is on display. A once conquered sin, and that's what we too need to think about. Sometimes, we've conquered that sin. We've never been bothered by it for a long time. Once a sin is conquered, it is not always a conquered sin. We must always be alert and watchful. In fact, if you remember 1 Corinthians 10 and 12 says, "Wherefore let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall." Christians can praise our moral values and standards and then find out at some point in their life that they can abandon their convictions when it looks like something else or someone else is more beneficial. Sin eats away at the vitality of our spiritual life. Though the men of Gaza surrounded the city, they could not capture Samson. Again, he simply ripped out those gates and carried them. I've heard that it said 40 miles to Hebron. Again, whether he carried them that far, I don't know. But listen, the man had super strength from the Lord. So I don't doubt that he could have done exactly that. Till you think about it, what is he doing? Why rip out the gates? Well, the fact that he's telling them, you can't capture me. In fact, now I'm going to leave your city exposed. But it's also, there's something even in Genesis 22 and 17 talking to Abraham and a promise to the seed of Abraham, and a promise it is to Jesus, thy seed shall possess the gates of his enemies. He was sending a message to the Philistines. Samson was in control, not them. But yet, Samson wasn't in control of himself. Now let's go from verse 4 to verse 20. This is all having to deal with Samson and Delilah, but this is also having to do with the fact that sin binds you. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, again a Philistine location, whose name was Delilah. Now, if you'll notice, there's nothing in this chapter that's said about courtship or marriage. Nothing is said about an arranged marriage. We see nothing of Samson bringing her to his home, but instead he is going into her home. It's not even stated whether she was a Philistine or from some other nation, but I think more likely she was a Philistine, because the lords of the Philistines came to talk to her, and that gives us a little bit more of the information that's there. She was more than likely, again, another prostitute. Verse 5, and the lords of the Philistines came up unto her and said unto her, entice him. They always seem to know where he's at and what he's doing, don't they? You think it's because he makes it obvious? That's why I said I think he's a little arrogant. He's not afraid of anybody or anything because of his strength that he has. But what does he do? They come to her and say, entice him and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. It's interesting. That'll only come up after the third try as we go about these the money that's here. Entice, the word has to do with allure him, to persuade him. In other words, it seems to be use your feminine wiles. It means to use the art of your femininity, I can't say it, seduce him. That's what it was. And every one of these lords committed to this bribe. Their enticement to her was a great sum of money. Let's say it was $50,000 in our money, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but you think it was a huge sum in her day. There is no subtlety in their words or in their plan. They were really quite upfront and bold in their offer and why. But they did not lay out that they would kill him, at least not just yet. They assumed that there was some sort of, it seems to be, some sort of an amulet maybe. You know, what's this guy's secret? Is he carrying a little stone, something around his neck? It can't be God, of course, right? It's got to be something. Maybe it's a spell. We have to know something that gives him his strength. And what happened? Verse 6, and Delilah said to Samson, oh, wait a minute. No discussion, no nothing. Immediately she goes to town. There's no question about what she would do. It appears that she accepted this idea of a bribe and then acted immediately on it when she said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. Now Samson, I think, must have known something was up. I don't think he can be quite that naive or this gullible, this easy to fool, can he? Her wording that is captured for us to read does not include what the enticement was. They said, entice him. All we see are the words. Delilah said to Samson, tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherein thou mightest be bound to afflict thee. No enticement there, is there? I don't think there is, except just the question. We don't know what it is, but it does include in the Hebrew, in the raw form of the words, how can you be bound so that you can be subdued? That's really the raw question that was there. And I think Samson knows what's going on, and he's not fearful. He's not even frustrated. So what does he do? He thinks he's going to play a little game. And he does. Verse 7, and Samson said unto her, if they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man. Withs. You have to look that one up. They're small cords, a small rope, possibly even something like a string made from sinew, animal tendons, oftentimes used for a bow. But he's talking about something that has never been dried. So Samson gives her the first of 3 lies in which he could be bound and brought under control. But again, I think this is a game. This is another way in which God used an evil design of the Philistines to work his purpose to displeasure and push out the Philistines. It sounds a little like the Philistines were the gullible ones here on this matter. Let's look at verse 8. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs, which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber, or in her house. And she said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he brake the withs as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire. So his strength was not known. So she not only cooperated with the Philistines in trying to discover the secret of Samson's strength, but she participated even in the binding. She's the one that put the bind around him. Sin will bind you. And she allowed men to lay wait in her house as she completed her part. Now this is where, again, many will say, well, they never jumped out when he says the Philistines are upon you. And you see nothing happens after that. Well, when you get down to the last time, you'll see that I think that they did jump out and that he destroyed their surprise by surprising them by breaking apart the strings that were there. You can imagine the surprise of those men when Samson broke the bonds, like it says, like a single string, and when it touches fire, poof, it's gone. That's what happened to those strings. Verse 10, and Delilah said unto Samson, behold, thou hast mocked me. Doesn't it sound familiar? Doesn't it sound like his wife when about the riddle? And again, you see kind of the same thing happening and repeating. Behold, thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. Now, I think it is true he did mock her. He did tell her lies. He did not give her the secret of his strength. So he lies a second time. Verse 11, and he said unto her, if they bind me fast with new ropes that were never occupied, then I shall be weak and be as another man. Here he simply prescribes new ropes. But what happens? Again, what do we read? But Delilah therefore took new ropes and bound him again. She's a participant. She binds him therewith and said unto him, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And I think they jumped up, and there were liars in wait abiding in the chamber. And when she said that, he broke them from off his arms like thread. Same old strength, same old results. He was set free. Samson was not entrapped. He broke the ropes from holding him, like it says, like threads that had been just simply wrapped around his arms. And what does Delilah do? Verse 13, and Delilah said unto Samson, hitherto thou hast mocked me, and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, if thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. Now her second failure turns into his third lie, and he talks to her about weaving his hair. Now also, we have to think about this. This man has never cut his hair all of his life. You're talking about pretty long hair. 7 locks. It's the way that he created it, the way that they put it on his head. And the exact method that was given to her is not fully understood because of the language barrier somewhat, or various meanings that are lost somewhat in history. But I think we can get enough of it to understand it does convey the idea of connecting those 7 locks to the pieces of what is called a loom, the way that she would wove cloth. The web is supposedly the woven cloth. We'll see that in a minute. The warp are the vertical threads, and the beam is the heavy piece of wood upon which the threads are arranged, and the pin is the wooden plug which secured his hair and that to the loom. And she fastened it with the pin, just like he told her. And she said, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." And he awaked out of his sleep and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. This again, no matter how you see it, if it was the big old loom, and a lot of times those were attached in some way to the floor to keep them from moving around, didn't matter. The whole thing was attached to him. It was just something that he just picked it right out of his hair. Didn't matter. It was worthless as a binding. So in verse 15, we read, "And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thy heart is not with me?" Now that's a real ploy there, and the wording is important because in a little while it says that he's going to pour out his heart to her. And she gets to him, "How can I say, I love thee in thine heart, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass when she pressed him daily," now we don't know how long this was, but it was a long time, "with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death." Again, Samson is overcome by a persistent pressure of words and emotions from a woman that he, can we say, loved or lusted after? He finally caved in. The lust of his flesh conquered him. Samson appears to be a man who did not deny the pleasures of his flesh. In fact, it appears that Samson fed them, and they conquered him rather than him conquering them. And that's a real key to the Christian life. We must conquer our own fleshly desires, or they will conquer us. Verse 17 says then that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, "There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man." The one obvious sign or mark of his vow, being a Nazarite, was his uncut hair. You couldn't miss it. This had to be a huge head of hair. I don't necessarily think that way, but I'm talking about whichever way you look at it. That's a lot of hair. And it must have certainly made him stand out from anyone else. Of course, his strength was not from his hair. His strength was from God and from his being sanctified to the calling that God had given to him. But once violated, he told her that he would become like any other man. Samson again was overcome by the desire to please Delilah instead of pleasing God. So what happened? Verse 18. "And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he has showed me all his heart." She was very convincing, because what happens? The lords of the Philistines came up unto her and brought money in their hand. They are convinced this is it. This was really what Delilah loved. Delilah loved money, and now she has it. And so what did she do? She made him sleep upon her knees, and instead of herself, she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. Sin took away this man's strength. He broke his vow and became physically weak because he was spiritually weak. The prophet Hosea, in speaking about Ephraim, he said that Ephraim was a cake half turned. And he goes on in Hosea chapter 7, verses 8 and 9. There's a last little phrase in that where it talks about Ephraim's strength had been devoured by strangers, and he knoweth it not. You're going to find out that's exactly what's happening here. His strength was devoured by strangers, and he didn't even know it. How she afflicted him, or how she vexed him, or how she tormented him, we do not know. But she is now showing her true colors. She wakes him as before, but this time it is in taunting him. She is confident of the loss of her strength. Look at verse 20, but notice that last sentence. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson, just like all the other times. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. And again, this is why I said that a lot of people will say, well, they never jumped out before. Well, it says he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times. I think the same thing that happened here is the same thing that happened every time. But this time, though his actions were repeated, he was unable to shake the Philistines from grabbing and binding him and then blinding him. The saddest part of this chapter and of this verse is that he was unaware that the Lord was departed from him. He was unaware until he was overcome. He was unaware until he was unable. All of a sudden, his experience with the power of God changed. His confidence was shaken, and the results will be horribly cruel. We'll stop there for tonight and pick back up with Samson and the prison in verses 21 and 22, again, where we will find this sin not only binds you, but blinds you and grinds you. I should at least read that verse. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. What a sad, sad commentary on the life of Samson. Now there's more to learn and more to appreciate, but we'll learn it next week. I pray the Lord's blessings upon you, and we'll just, like I said, save that for the next time. That's about as far as we normally go with our time and our amount of information that's allotted to us. And so knowing that, we'll just